Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Agti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
In this episode, Aaron and Trishul apply previous conversations about happiness and well-being to the upcoming holidays. Being conscious and aware of the things that provide happiness or the things that create stress can help you focus on ways to increase the former and decrease the latter. They reminisce over holiday nostalgia. They discuss the impact of expectations and the need to get creative for the 2020 holiday season. Prioritizing time over money is a big theme in increasing happiness for both the gifter and the giftee. And because they just couldn't help themselves, they discuss qualified charitable distributions and gifting appreciated stock to charities. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, my name is Aaron Agti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey, Aaron, great to be here today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Great to be here as well. Last week, we talked about kind of end of the year investment and tax planning, things you can look forward to. And today we want to be a little more subjective. We're still financial advisors, so there's going to be some kind of financial bent to the conversation, but we want to just kind of talk about how we think about the holidays coming up, how we think about happiness and well-being, and then kind of there's some financial ideas tied in with that. And this is not necessarily available for everyone, but some of the things we might look out for some clients. But just with the holidays coming up and the end of the year, if you are conscious of some things that can improve your happiness or well-being, and also conscious of things that may cause stress or anxiety, you can then kind of have a better coping system, or kind of do more of the good things and less of the bad things. And hopefully come January, you're feeling just a little bit better. So Trishul, do you mind sharing, with the holidays coming up, what are some of the ways that you celebrate the holidays at the end of the year?
I think since I've been traveling around quite a bit, it's evolved depending on how far or close I am from family. But growing up, it was a time where we did have a lot of people in terms of extended family gathering, either at my place or a relative's place. And that was always a time to have a big gathering, and certainly many memorable experiences came from that. I do fondly remember having dozens of kids just running around during this time, including myself, and many fond memories of situations like that. What I also realized, though, is, as we grew up and as I was in different places, it's always been a little bit different. For example, being in Southeast Asia, where it's 80 degrees and this time is a little different than being in the United States. But now that I'm back here and I'm on the East Coast, I'm closer to family, it does feel a little bit like how it used to. So there is some nostalgia there. How about you, Aaron?
That's a great point, and I do think that's pretty key, and hopefully as universal as possible, that spending time with friends and family are those things that feel really good. And both anecdotally, just our own, like you said, the nostalgia of seeing all the kids running around, I always thought of it as grandparents' house, but now I'm kind of realizing it's the adult children's parents' house kind of thing, where they have the same family, but now they have little kids that they're bringing along with them. So it's very similar to what the kind of middle generation has been experienced already. We have spent a few holidays, especially here in the Bay Area, with my in-laws, with my wife's family. And I remember one year, most of the kids were between like newborn and 4 or 5. I think the oldest might have been 5. And we literally created just this big ring of chairs all around the outside of a room. And that gave the adults just a chance to kind of sit down and talk to each other. And all the kids were in the middle of that playing with toys. And because there's enough adults, they're kind of an ongoing supervision, and we didn't have to worry about the kids running off and hurting themselves. Because a lot of the kids were like in that 1 to 3 range where they're just mobile enough to like really hurt themselves if they're not constantly supervised. And I loved that feeling, that there's feeling of just kind of hanging out with friends and family, those bigger gatherings. An uncle once described to me kind of why he likes Thanksgiving more than Christmas, is that Thanksgiving had that just awesome feeling of hanging out with friends and family and just all being together, just mingling, just walking around the house, having conversations, but without the stress of presents or expectations that tend to come along with Christmas. Now, I love both of those very much, but especially as an adult, especially as I've kind of read more into happiness research, I do think that spending time with friends and family is more important than some of the other parts of Christmas specifically. And that's why I truly love Thanksgiving and Christmas, is that just going into a house, and now that my kids are 9, 7, and 4, they can kind of, like you said, go play by themselves a little bit, and having 8 cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents just sitting around a table talking, that feeling is great. And it's one of those things of just anecdotally it makes sense, but also is backed up by academic research on happiness. Spending time with friends and family genuinely improves your happiness and well-being. And so my parents are not in the Bay Area, so for a long time we'd have to kind of choose. We're going to spend Thanksgiving with my parents and Christmas with my wife's parents, and then vice versa the following year. As they've moved, there's been some coordination, and that it really is one of those things I'm going to miss this year. It is just acknowledging we're not going to get together with cousins. We're not going to have that indoor gathering where there's, I think it's something like 20 adults and another 15 kids under the age of 9. I think that's what we did last year. And so I'm thinking about it now because I don't know how to feel yet. I guess that makes sense. Like, I know that's the thing I love. And my wife has more cousins in the area, so her family gatherings tend to be larger. But just sitting around that table and hanging out, that feeling, and I don't know how that's going to look this year, how it's going to feel. But I think it's just classic. If I'm in the Bay Area, I play football on the morning of Thanksgiving, and my wife watches the Thanksgiving Day parade. And then we go over to either her parents or her aunt and uncle's house, and we're just kind of hanging out for hours. At some point, I might be interested in a conversation about the sexism related to Thanksgiving, where the older generation of women have been cooking for their husbands and they cook Thanksgiving dinners. And I don't think my wife's ever going to participate in that part, but I don't think there's an expectation that she will. But I do know that of those who are cooking, it is the wives and not the husbands. But for today's conversation, it's just that feeling of spending time with friends and family, and it's definitely not gonna be the same this year. But I think that there's enough other things that we can try to do to make up for it. Like, my wife and I love decorating our house for Christmas. If you actually go to my website, one of my articles has a picture of the house with all of our Christmas lights up. and we keep adding to this every year. And this year, we're going to decorate even earlier, possibly as early as like November 1st. Like I can see decorating for Christmas that early because we really enjoy it. It genuinely makes us happy. And especially when daylight savings time ends and it gets dark at 5 o'clock or 4:30 and the Christmas lights come on, it feels really good to come home when we pick up our son from daycare. And we've had notes and comments from people who walk the neighborhood that they like our Christmas lights. So I think that's one of those things that we do every year. We love it. And in time of COVID, we're leaning into that because it is relatively safe. I just realized that was a lot longer than I expected. So sorry about that.
All good. I enjoyed hearing how you've handled the situation as you plan on moving forward. But also, you had some pretty good tidbits in there that I'd like to just kind of comment off of. First of all, that's a very neat plan of having the circle of adults. I feel like I should take notes on that. You might have just solved our daycare problems for post-COVID. But I think it is kind of different when having children now. I have a little bit of a different feel as it comes to the holidays, because I recall last year for the first time gathering as a larger group with my daughter who had just turned 2, and it was one of those times where my daughter got to go run off and play with a bunch of kids who she likely didn't ever remember seeing before, just because she was so young. But she just enjoyed it so much. Pretty sure she had the time of her life over those few days. And it also gave the parents a little bit of a break by keeping the kids so occupied with all that was happening. In terms of what might change this year, yeah, it'll be certainly a little different. I'm sure gatherings will be smaller, and I think it might be just alternative forms of being able to kind of get engaged with what's going on. I do remember something around what we had in Hershey. I live near in Pennsylvania, and Hershey Park does this really amazing Christmas light show that you can kind of drive through. So they basically take over a few streets and kind of close it down. And they put on just dozens and dozens of displays of beautiful lights. And you kind of sit in your car and you just drive around for like a couple miles. And that's something we did last year a few times with my daughter, and I kind of look forward to that this year. But there's always that house in a given neighborhood that kind of goes all out, and we always like checking that out. It sounds like that's your house, Aaron, for your neck of the woods.
On our street specifically, yes. There is a street in nearby Redwood City that is famous for being kind of what you're describing. Like they close down the street, everyone in the house decorates. I think it's like part of their HOA when the houses get bought and sold. And this is the one, like, you're worried about their electric bill. They really, really go all out, and it's really impressive. And every night you'll see a ton of people trying to park on side streets and then just walking up and down this one street. So my wife would love to participate in that kind of decorating. I don't know if I'm up to that challenge, but we go see that every year. Yeah.
Yeah, well, over time, I think you might be able to get there.
I think that's I think my wife was only half joking. If we won the lottery, she would want to hire people to decorate all the other houses on our street for them and turn our street into that. I think that's what my wife would like to do with her money if she won the lottery and won the millions of dollars.
Right. Well, I'm sure you'll have some planning in there, so you're not like the statistic where most lottery winners go broke after a few years.
Correct. I would give her the Christmas decorating all of our neighbors' budget each year.
Set up a annuity for that.
Yeah. Make sure it's got adjusted for inflation, because Christmas lights get more expensive every year.
I trust your planning skills on choosing the appropriate product. But yeah, so when it comes to holidays, there are also some unfortunate things where stress does tend to build over this period for a variety of reasons. So it perhaps also worth noting that this period can bring on situations that can be kind of uncomfortable. And hopefully there are ways to deal with that by kind of being proactive about some of these things. For example, it's kind of unfortunate, but around these times with holidays, it may just kind of bring up unhappy memories of things that have happened over the year or just past holiday experiences that are rememberable in a nice way or not so nice way. And then, of course, you're kind of meeting with individuals that you may not be on the same wavelength with, and that might be some source of tension for other people. And there's also this kind of notion of if you're in a situation where either family is not so near or in a situation where you're a little bit more isolated than you would like to be, then the holidays can kind of shine a light on some of these things. So it's probably worth noting that stress and other causes of depression kind of get highlighted around this period, especially because, frankly, it is colder. There's less sunlight. So vitamin D can probably be a little bit of a help, but your immune system is a bit compromised during this season as well.
Yeah, and there's again stories, both anecdotal and there's a little bit of evidence to back this up. Cases of depression tend to go up around this time. I believe suicides go up around this time, and I think the guess or theory is that just like you said, highlighting the things that some people don't have can make things worse.
Yeah, and it also seems like expectations go up a bit. Certainly with the notion of, as you mentioned, the expectation that might be placed on the person in charge of creating the 20-person feast, which traditionally has been women in our society. And having to also fill in the increased financial burden across this time is also surely to add to some of the stress that creeps up around this season.
Yeah. I do think that there are, I don't know if we're there yet on a massive scale, but I can see if we're kind of not careful, just the path our site is going down, that there is, I don't want to say an expectation, but almost a necessity for more dual income households, both husband and wife or other couples. They both need to be earning money depending on where they're living, but especially in the Bay Area, that tends to be the most common case. And there's that expectation that women will cook Thanksgiving dinners, and those are probably not feasible over time to have both those expectations. And I try to listen to both my wife and other female advisors when they try and talk about some of these issues, and I'd rather defer to their expertise, but I think at least listening and understanding expectations is a step. And I do wonder, like, would our holiday conversation about stress and happiness be different if we had a female guest on today?
I imagine it would. There's certainly high expectations to kind of put on the perfect meal or have the perfect surroundings with family, and everything goes smoothly when you know that there's going to be a lot going on and a lot of things that you can't control exactly.
Yeah. So if we're trying to at least acknowledge that you and I are not going to solve sexism in this country in our 50-minute conversation today, and we're not going to solve depression in the same time frame, what are some little things that people can do to kind of make things just a little bit better, if nothing else, just for themselves? What are some ways that, either anecdotally or through research, that might improve someone's situation, acknowledging that they're going into this season?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned acknowledge. It seems like a very high level thing we want to give ourselves freedom to do is just acknowledge the feelings that we kind of face around this period and not try to kind of bury them deep. It's okay, as we mentioned, for example, in a past episode, to feel grief, during this time of COVID. And it's okay to feel the similar feelings of grief during times of the holiday season. Yeah, they're supposed to be happy, but there may be reasons where eh, you may not be as happy as you would like to be. And that's okay. It's okay to take time to express your feelings and be more comfortable with whatever emotional state you happen to be in.
Yeah, one of the things I try to, that's a great point, just kind of not almost like being honest with yourself, and like, I like Carl Richards, like he'll give you permission to feel things. So it's like we can give people permission to just feel sad sometimes. Like it's not like it's this, they won't give themselves permission, but these random people that they're listening to online, if they hear it, that actually might help sometimes. When it Other things that kind of we talked about in the past when it comes to kind of happiness research and well-being, things like paying now and consuming later. So if you were to pay for something far in advance, especially like an experience, when it comes to the actual thing, you don't feel that pain of payment, and so you appreciate the thing even more. And a lot of times with holidays, it tends to be the opposite, where when it comes to especially kind of Christmas or other gift giving holidays, people tend to kind of buy now, but put it on a credit card and pay for it later. And that tends to increase stress and anxiety and or psychological pain, but not in the moment. It's kind of when it comes later on down the road. And so as much as possible, trying to have a good understanding of your financial situation to avoid that buy now, pay later. That's one of the ways that you can help deal with stress that comes during the holidays. Another big theme is just giving or gifting. That there's pretty good research that kind of investing in others or giving your time or even giving your money has shown to improve the well-being and improve the happiness of the people giving. That it goes back to the conversation we had about altruism. Kind of, if you have a good feeling, is it truly altruistic? Because you get some benefit, but that's okay. In this situation, it really is okay to set up some kind of gifting or giving. This is actually kind of the like classic Christmas stories, going back to a Christmas Carol, of like the act of giving makes the gifter feel better, improves their happiness. So there are a couple things that come up kind of from a financial advisor perspective, but with that in mind, what are some of the things that you think of in terms of giving or gifting around this time of the year?
Well, that's a good one, especially because, as we mentioned, if you're feeling a little isolated around this time of year, then reaching out is important. And a good way to reach out is by volunteering your time or being more engaged with the community or other religious or social events that are going on around this time. And it can kind of open the opportunity to kind of also broaden your friendships and form new ones. It's a little tricky during COVID, but I'm sure that there must be ways to still be able to, provide your time for the benefit of others in some capacity. So I think that sounds like a good way to hopefully edge to a little better or a little more comfortable position if you're kind of struggling through this period, or frankly, for anyone who wants to make a little bit more out of the holiday season. I think the other thing I'd highlight, though, is you probably want to just be realistic when it comes to all the expectations that are kind of set, meaning everything, doesn't have to be perfect, especially this year. I think we can give ourselves a bit more permission to realize that, last year was different. It's not the same period that we're going through, so we can hopefully make some consolations along the way. And we may have to get just a little bit more creative in terms of how we share our lives with each other during a period of self-isolation, for example. Setting up events where you're celebrating Christmas dinner, but maybe virtually might be an option, or just sharing more emails, pictures, and videos and clips and things like that around this period might also be helpful.
One of the things I've seen, and my family, extended family is even considering this, is if everyone was to get tested for COVID, say within 3 to 6 days before an event, something like that, where if you were to get tested and have some kind of quarantine, that might alleviate some of those concerns and allow to have that slightly bigger indoor gathering. It's not perfect, it's not risk-free, but that might be the kind of thing that could reduce the risk enough that you might still get some enjoyment out of seeing friends and family. And so we don't know if this is going to happen within our family, but kind of if you can get everyone to take a test beforehand, then it might be okay to have this. And we're kind of seeing that play out with professional sports, where if they're getting tested so often that they can isolate or quarantine those who aren't, but they're able to have large team practices. You're having dozens, if not close to 100 people within certain facilities, and they're doing a pretty good job. And it's not perfect. There's been some positive tests, but I think it is possible to do things the right way, follow the science. And if you were to get tested and everyone's get tested and everyone has a negative test, then it might be okay to have those gatherings.
Yeah, it's an interesting one where it seems like creative solutions might be the way to go in terms of what might make sense. And, frankly, we've said this a handful of times. It seems like that there's no right answer to any of this. It's more a choose your own adventure, or choose your own what you feel most comfortable with given your situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like how you honed in on also the notion of just trying to stick to a budget, having some financial constraint as you go through this. And it does make sense. Certainly it's backed up by research with the understanding that you put forward, kind of having the ability to come up with a budget beforehand, being able to hopefully stick to that and not run over into credit cards. That certainly seems sensible. And at the same time, it's important to think about what can be kind of substituted with alternative means. For example, we know that you can give the gift of an item, but you can also give the gift of your time, or give the gift of an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, of course, DIY gifts, especially if we have children, baked goods, crafts, things like that. That always goes a long way. And the children, frankly, I think they have a good time with the actual creation notion. It allows them to be a bit more creative. I've heard of this concept of having like a coupon book for kids where they get certain activities that they get to draw upon, or certain items, like they get to request baking a cookie one weekend, or they get to go for a car ride to see the farm and go picking for apples or something. So It doesn't necessarily have to be monetarily tied in terms of all we end up doing. Of course, if you are going down the gift route, it is sensible to, for example, start early. And we know Black Friday is coming up. That might be an opportunity, or it might be an opportunity to go Cyber Monday if that's what you're kind of into. It seems like this season holiday shopping is going to be quite virtual as it is. Well, one thing I'll mention, though, I did remember a tidbit from a year or two ago where if you're going for that big bargain for like an electronic item, do keep in mind that sometimes I've heard retailers actually kind of increasing the prices a little bit before the Black Friday season and then lowering it to kind of a little bit less or even around the same of what they used to be. So if it's a big ticket item, you might want to research historical prices. I can put a few links in the show notes that might help you do that.
I've heard the same thing that, oh, this is 50% off, a 50% increase.
Right. I've also heard manufacturers even go out of their way to have like the lowest cost 50-inch TV, but to actually do that, they might pull in an item that doesn't include all the features that a similar price item might have included a few months ago. So they might actually make a product for this period that's lower in quality, but kind of appears to be the same as a similar item before the holiday season.
Yeah. I think that ends up being like I think back to my uncle mentioned it's the consumerism aspect has, I think that's one of the big causes of like that's just like a big overarching cloud of all the little things that do increase stress and anxiety. And like you said, a lot of the better things that kind of improve happiness don't necessarily cost anything. Spending time with friends and family, experiences, time, those are the things that create happiness. And the giving and gifting, it does not necessarily have to be financial. Like I said, it could be giving your time. But if you are trying to substitute consumerism, that probably will definitely not have the positive effect you might be looking for, but actually could have a deleterious effect. And so just at the very least at this stage, being conscious of that and understanding that. So I think there's a difference between spending a lot of money on a gift versus putting in the time to find the right gift, even if they cost the same. I think that's an observation my wife and I have had specifically about. It's not just how much you spend, and actually, if it's how much you spend, it's almost makes it worse. But it's, did you figure out what they want? Did you do the research and get them the thing they really appreciate? That tends to be more positive, and that there's more appreciation of the time that went into it, which I think is part of what comes to from those kind of crafting gifts or DIY gifts. I think there's a genuine appreciation of the time that went into something versus going to Amazon, spending 5 minutes, click, order, done. So that might be when thinking about your time. Like if you can figure out how to put in more time, that will increase the appreciation by the gift recipient.
Yeah, I like that. I think it also highlights the notion that if you want to not kind of go over, you probably want to start early as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So traditionally, if you're waiting the week before Christmas, then chances are you'll probably be rushing around to find an item that's if it's a hot item, you'll likely overpay.
Yeah.
And it can kind of add up. Just, some numbers. Gallup does track this going back to early 2000s. And 2019, Americans spend the most they had ever spent, almost $942 on average per per household. So that's a lot of money. And frankly, we're into a kind of special year with 2020. Something to kind of think about as you kind of calibrate yourself is before the financial crisis was the last peak where Americans were spending around $900 ish, but that dropped to around $700 ish at a low of 2011, once all of the big financial mess traversed through our economy. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see that drop by 10, 20% this year in terms of what we might have spent last year for the average American. And it's okay to understand that again, we can hopefully give ourselves permission to understand it's a different situation. Something that was kind of clear last year is a third of families expected to spend more than they had the year before. And of course they did. But also last year, about 1 in 7 households maxed out their credit card limits to kind of get through the season. And that's not actually going into credit. That means going into credit to the max, meaning you can't spend another dollar. That's 1 in 7. That's kind of tough to dig yourself out of. And just as we mentioned, as it relates to happiness, that's a pretty heavy burden to bring on, especially since you'll be feeling that pain well past the holiday season if you can't get those below.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's certainly tough, but perhaps maybe there's some things that we can do to alleviate some of this. There's other research that had asked people, what would you do to kind of get out of this burden? And the top response was a quarter of people, 1 in 4, said that they would be willing to receive no gifts if they could avoid having to incur any holiday expenses.
I've seen a few groups of friends kind of implement that. I think there's even a good Dilbert comic where Dogbert and Dilbert, they each hand each other a $20 bill. I like that. That's their Christmas gift. Like they're just exchanging 2 different $20 bills. And they're trying to it's a comic, so it's making fun of that situation. But I think there's a lot of people who would feel like it gets almost to that expectations thing that they don't want to have to spend. They don't have to put themselves at kind of financial risk by spending money on gifts. But if there's an expectation of reciprocity and someone else gives them a gift, they'll feel like they have to return it or get them something in exchange. And if you can remove that expectation, there's some groups of people that truly appreciate that. Another cousin has had, before COVID, an annual make or bake party where it's a gift exchange style party. Everyone brings one thing. It's kind of white elephant style, so there's rules for how they get exchanged, but it has to be something that you either made or that you baked. And so kind of either a food item or some kind of craft. And that was always really well received. So, and I think that speaks to that putting in time rather than putting in money.
That is a good one. I like how that also might relate to that notion of easing the pressure off of who's ever responsible for that overly fantastic Thanksgiving feast. Having a potluck style meal is certainly something that can also open the door to have a lot of variety and choice and a lot of interesting things that probably one person couldn't come up with on their own, but also alleviating some of that pressure for that individual or a group of individual tasked with putting on the event.
Yeah, and I remember I made a scrap wood end table. So I just had some wood from other projects. So I made a little end table and someone received that. And someone else at the party had made cookies. I think that's what I got. Someone also made a princess cake. The the fondant shell that my wife got. So like we both, I think my wife, I think she knitted something, or no, she's been doing a lot of sewing and quilting. I think she made something like that. But yeah, it's like you go there with one, like, yeah, it's like, it's not quite a trade because it was a good party, but kind of, I made an end table and got cookies in return. Like, oh, this is awesome. I love cookies. So I think I've
That is
mentioned that a
neat.
few times on this podcast.
I like hearing about win-wins like this. It's there are things where Adam Smith can help us understand that even with the ability to be able to come up with solutions that are financially obligating, you can come up with solutions that we're all better off than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. So getting back to those like traditional end of year gifting strategies. And because you and I are both financial advisors, and that supposedly that's why people come to listen to this, I did want to make sure we touched on a couple things. One was looking at qualified charitable distributions, and the other was gifting to charities and some kind of opportunities to look for. So is there anything else that you want to make sure we add to that list when we think about gifting from a like optimized perspective? So it's not just the gifting and the feeling, but you're a financial advisor. You make sure, okay, if we're going to gift, let's do it the right way to get the maximum benefit.
Yeah, I like those two. Those two are certainly sensible. And the qualified charitable distribution is something that might make sense if you're above the age where you're required to take a minimum distribution, an RMD, from one of your retirement accounts. So that's good for somebody in that age group, 72 as of now. But also for just gifting in general, if you're not 72, I like the ability to gift to charities, gifting property, and there's certain advantages you can take there. So those are definitely two solid choices to think about.
So quick explanation, if you're over what was 70.5 in the past is now 72, and you have money in a traditional IRA or 401k, you need to take a required minimum distribution each year, an RMD. IRS wants to get their money, so they force you to take some out. There's calculations for that. But if you don't need that money for your lifestyle and you do a qualified charitable distribution, QCD, the money that would have been your RMD goes directly to the charity. So you do not take the money, you do not pay taxes on that because it's going directly to the charity, and that satisfies your RMD. So this can be a way for people who have money in a traditional IRA and they don't necessarily need it and they don't want to increase their taxable income. You can do a QCD and that satisfies your RMD without increasing your taxable income. You don't get a normal charitable deduction for that contribution, but you are foregoing taxable income. And for all intents and purposes, it works out the same. The other one you said gifting property. So the classic example, if you have a stock that has appreciated and has a low basis, high current value, if you were to sell it, you will pay a large capital gain. But if you were to gift that stock directly to a 501c3 charity, so it's a qualified charity under IRS rules, you get the benefit of gifting the value of the stock, and you don't have to sell it to pay capital gains taxes. So you get the full deduction of, or I don't say deduction because your individual tax situation determines that, but you get the full charitable contribution for that stock. And when the charity sells it, because they're a qualified charity, they don't owe capital gains taxes either. So it's one of those things of, if you are giving to a charity anyways, and they're capable of receiving stock, a lot of times gifting that appreciated stock makes more sense than selling it and gifting cash. So there are times to be a little opportunistic of, if you're going to gift anyways, and that's a qualified charity, let's at the very least make sure we do it in the most effective way.
Right. Yeah. And the charity doesn't miss out on anything. They can take that stock and sell it without having to pay the taxes on that gain, and they get that money. So it's kind of a win-win for you, for the charity, and it's kind of something sensible to do. I guess the only caveat I'd put in for the qualified charitable distribution for RMDs is we kind of mentioned this in the past, but for this year, you actually won't be required to take an RMD due to the CARES Act and COVID. But it's certainly something to keep in your back pocket for when that situation comes up.
And yeah, so you can do a qualified charitable distribution anytime and have that money go direct to the charity, and you don't pay taxes on it. So if you wanted to give to the charity anyways, and you have money in your IRA, you can do that qualified charitable distribution even if you don't have an RMD, and the same logistics apply. You don't pay taxes on that IRA distribution because it goes directly to the charity. And now you might be reducing your IRA balance that might actually reduce your future RMD. So it does satisfy the RMD, but it doesn't have to be in place of the RMD. You can use a qualified charitable distribution, QCD, for more than the RMD, or if you don't even have an RMD.
Right. And just for some dollar amounts for the QCD, if you're single, then it's about 100,000. That's the limit that you can do. And if you're married, then you would probably double that. So 200,000 per couple.
Oh, good call. Good point. Yeah, thank you.
So I'm not aware of a limit on the gifts of appreciated stock. It's my understanding that if it's a charity that's qualified, then you could kind of go all out on that. Are you aware of a limit on that, Aaron?
There isn't necessarily a limit on how much you can give, especially when it comes to kind of avoiding the capital gain by gifting the stock. There are times where the amount you can take as a charitable deduction can change. I'm trying to remember if there are any AMT issues, but there's phase outs, I believe, for how much you can deduct when giving to charity. Let me see if Google can answer it really quickly. Looks like under the CARES Act, individuals conduct donations up to 100% of their 2020 AGI, up from 60% previously. So it was the case where you didn't get a full deduction against your income, but looks like that has increased to at least to what your AGI is. So that might be a kind of thing. If your income isn't that high, but you are donating assets, that's the only deduction that you can't deduct more than your AGI. So you can't get a refund or credit based on that.
Right. Well, that's good to know. And then I guess what we might also throw in is if you're just gifting to a family member, if it's below 15,000 to X person or Y person, you don't have to worry about it. But if you start going over that, you may need to think about the overall amount of gifts that you're allowed to give as it relates to just the gift tax in general. So we covered this before when we talked about estate taxes and estate planning, but it's something where you have a lifetime exemption amount of how much gifts you can give. And if you're above that, then you have to pay a pretty heavy tax. So currently it's around 11 and change million if you're single and 23 and change million if you're married. But if you're giving less than 15,000 this Christmas time or this holiday season time, then you should be okay on not having to worry about that.
Yeah. And again, like you said, it's from person to person. So if you had two parents want to give to a child and spouse, that's a total of $60,000. One parent gives to two, other parent gives to two, and so you can kind of get that 15 times 4 situation. So, and that's the same idea of grandparents to grandchildren. Like it's per person to person. But yeah, once you get above that, you want to start planning, coordinating, either are you paying gift taxes or using your lifetime exemption, like you said.
Right. Well, good stuff, Aaron.
I agree. This was it got a little dark, it got a little deep, but I think acknowledging that and being conscious of your own choices and actions moving forward and going into the holidays, I think makes a lot of sense. And so I feel a lot better than I did 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, me too, Aaron. I think it is good to acknowledge that this period can be a time of great joy, but it can also be a time of some pain along the way. And there are things we can do. So good stuff.
Well, thank you. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. I look forward to it as well. And thanks, everybody, for listening. If you're enjoying these conversations, do spread the word. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye. We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and has no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.